Welcome back to the Haven Homestead podcast, where we learn and grow together on our way to living more sustainable lives. My name is Chris, and this is episode 36. And today we're going to be talking about my favorite permaculture design book, or I guess my second favorite homesteading book, which is called Gaias Garden by Toby Hemenway. But before we start going over some of my favorite things about this awesome book, I want to remind you about havenhomestead.com, where you can find out about all that we have going on here and learn about the classes we have upcoming, or coming up, whichever way you prefer to say it, and everything that we offer here. Also pictures of the homestead and the family. Also, please consider supporting us on patreon.com/havenhomestead. That's Patreon, patreon.com/havenhomestead. And you can support the show for as little as $1 a month. That's only 25 cents an episode. I think that it's well worth it. I try to make it worth it on each and every episode. And now, Lindsay, I believe you have something from our sponsors. Take it away.
Vic Zatteray and his team at Happy Leaf LED are changing the way growers think about grow lights. Happy Leaf LED is no joke lighting technology that really works. The lights are affordable, powerful, and efficient. With their Anywhere Anytime garden kits, they'll change the way you think about hydroponics too. For more information on Happy Leaf LED, go to happyleafled.com. You'll be happy you did. And here's a little personal plug. Emma and I wrote a book called A Christmas Angel a couple years ago. I've self-published it, and now we are getting it published as a board book. Since I'm an indie publisher, we have to put on a Kickstarter in order to fund this project. And the truth of the matter is, it's not about me. It's about this story and your family and how it can help you. The little blurb from the back of the book goes a little something like this. Celeste is a very little angel. Sometimes she has a hard time helping. Can she find a big way to help at Christmas? Emma says the definition of the book is to find big ways to help even though you're little. So if you're interested in getting a copy of A Christmas Angel as a board book for your family to read together this Christmas, head on over to Kickstarter.com and search for A Christmas Angel. Find a reward level that works for you, and let's get this project funded.
Thanks, Lindsay. I also would like to give a little shout out to one of our friends at Meacham Manor soaps. They sent us some soaps, and I was so excited. I saw the rosemary mint, and I told Lindsay, I said, Lindsay, this one's mine. And a red little note that was put in there, and sure enough, that one was meant for me. So I was really excited. The bar looks awesome, smells awesome, and I was telling Lindsay, I have it right here on the thing, I just sniffed it. Yum. And I just told Lindsay that I'm thinking I'll maybe put a little bit, grate a little bit, I don't know if it'll work or not, but into my shaving soap, and that way my shaving soap has kind of this rosemary mint smell to it when I work up a nice frothy lather. So we'll see how it works. And I want to say thank you, Meacham Manor Soaps, for sending that to us. I had a question from a listener, and the question is, onions, are they cold hardy? Do they stay in the ground, or need to protect them from frost? So what I found out about onions is they like to grow in warm soil. So plant them when they're going to plant them early in the spring or after the first frost, because the tender shoots can be, they're tender, so they can be damaged by frost. But then they need long hours of daylight during the summer to reach full maturity. Then, when they are fully mature, they can handle cold weather and even snow. But I would suggest covering them with mulch or a frame, a hoop house of some sort, to keep them a little bit protected from some of the worst of the weather. And then when you do harvest them, and I wouldn't leave them in the ground for too long. I don't know, they might be able to overwinter, but I would take them out before then. and you need to let them cure in a dry place where they have good airflow. You don't want them next to each other in a plastic bag or anything like that. Get them so they can have plenty of airflow, and then after they've cured for a couple weeks, then put them into some sort of sack or bag that will let them breathe, and they will continue to, they'll keep longer. They'll have a longer shelf life if you do these, simple steps. So onions are cold hardy to a point, but after they've gotten their growth in over the season, it seems like in the dry side of the state in Washington, my dad works on a farm, and at that farm they always harvest their onions. I think they do it even before their potatoes, or maybe around the same time, but it's usually before it starts getting too cold. I think because then the ground is easier to work before it freezes the onions in place. I think that's the main reason why they do that. But I hope that answers your question. So onions are kind of cold hardy, but just protect the tender ones in the early season so they don't get frozen, and then when you do harvest them before they're frozen in the ground, I guess, and let them cure. If you have any other questions, if anybody has any questions, then please feel free to contact us at havenhomestead.com and ask away. I like the interaction. Also on Patreon, I sometimes, for our patrons, they get special announcements, or they get to hear things before anybody else does, and that kind of gives a place for a bit of community. So if you're interested in going there, then you can go and check out the Patreon page, and you don't have to be a patron to ask questions and be part of the community, but to get the patron only posts, kind of exclusive content, then you do. Alright, so let's get into Gaia's Garden by Toby Hemenway. This is a guide to home-scale permaculture, and this is the second edition, and I really like this book. I've some of the books that we have on permaculture design. Now, permaculture, I'll just kind of give a real easy explanation, I guess, a real bland, not really getting into much detail about it, is I'm just going to say that it is a design science based on natural plant interactions. So that you'd go into a forest. So, for instance, Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, when they were first looking at the way a forest works, that's kind of where they came up with the term permaculture. And they were observing a forest and how abundant it was and how rich it was, and that's kind of where they came from, permaculture, permanent culture, or permanent agriculture. And so what it is you design your life, your surroundings, to mimic natural systems so that the plants will help each other and become more fruitful together, even more fruitful than they would if they were by themselves. So that's kind of, and should take some of the labor out of it too, with the weeding and fertilizing and cultivating. This is kind of a more natural way of doing things. So in Gaia's Garden, Toby, he passed away last year in December 2016, from pancreatic cancer, and then it spread throughout his body, and it was just a terrible loss to the community. He was 64, I think, years old, so he's still pretty young to die from such a terrible thing. But in this book, there are some parts that I really like and that I've used, and that's what I'm going to go over. I'm not going to go over just the different titles and subtitles like I did on the Self-Sufficient Life and How to Live It. I'm going to go through a few things here that I found useful in this book, and I would suggest that you get this book. It's not a very big book. So I'll look real fast. I have the book here in front of me, so you might hear the pages flipping. 300 pages, including the index in the back, or the appendix, I guess, or whatever you call it. So one of the things that I really like is the pictures, for one. It has some really nice pictures of of different gardens, and with a little bit of explanation and what's going on in the picture. Some of these, sometimes you get books and it's hard to see things, but these are really nice full color pictures and stuff. So one of the things that's kind of near the beginning of the page 38 and 39, it talks about paths for your garden. So when you're planning your garden, a lot of people will do a path. So like if you do it in straight lines, there'll be a path, a row where your vegetables grow, then a path, then a row, then a path, then a row, all the way down. That means that probably 50% of your garden is path. 50% of your growing space is a path. So that's very inefficient. And he goes about and talks here about the different kinds. So say if you did 2 rows and then a path, and then 2 rows and a path, then a third of your garden, which is better than a half of your garden, but a third of your garden is then path rather than half. So now we're going in the right direction. And then he talks about a couple other ways. And one that we did in our garden one year was the keyhole. In fact, I planned on our garden being just a keyhole garden, but it ended up being a rectangle garden with raised, I guess you could say raised or designated beds in it, so you can reach in to the bed, and we've had it divided up so we can put rabbits in their cages on the ground between the raised beds. In the keyhole design, it just depending on, so what it is you have a round bed, then there's a path that goes in with a circle in the middle where you can go in and turn like a wheelbarrow around in, and then you go back out the same way you came in. And this cuts your garden down, or your paths in your garden down to less than a quarter of your gardening space is a keyhole. And I was like, that is really neat. And then you could have it to where the path goes out and there's several keyholes, and they have pictures in here about having several keyholes on one so that you can reach them all from a central, like a turnaround point, and kind of like cul-de-sac where you drive in and there's all the houses along, because you can fit a lot more houses in a space that way. That's one of the ones that we've used here. We've also used the herb spiral, which we teach a class on unique gardening methods, and one is a herb spiral. And what you can do is you take and I use this in my class too, is I say just think of what the plant needs, not the name of the plant, but think of what it looks like and what it needs, and that's how we're going to plant in our herb spiral. So at the very tippy top, so our herb spiral it's kind of like a ramp, a spiraling ramp that goes up, or a snail shell. And so the very middle, where the curves are starting to get tight, is getting higher and higher. And so the very middle is the tightest spot, and that's where you would put something like a rosemary. And the reason why you put a rosemary up there is because rosemaries need, they're a Mediterranean plant, so they need less water, they need more sunshine, and they need that. That's the best kind of spot in an herb spiral for something like that. And they can grow kind of big, so they're not going to be pushing things out of the way because they're already on top. Then as you go down the herb spiral, you start to pick different plants depending on their needs, all the way until you're at the bottom. And at the bottom you would have something like calendula, coriander, parsley, chives, things that are kind of smaller plants that need a wetter climate. Anyways, I was just we've used that. That's another thing, and we put our herb spiral out, and it worked really well. So that's one of the things. In permaculture, there are there's lots of talk about zones, and the zones are usually how many times you visit a place in a day. So your house would be zone 1. Or some people say zone 0, like the house itself is zone 0. But we'll say the house is zone 1, and then all the places that you go outside the house the most often would be zone 2. And that way that if you're going to have a plant there, you're going to walk by these things every day or a couple times every day. And then zone 3 is maybe less intensity, things you might not visit very often, or once in a while. Like we have a path out to a certain clearing, and yes, it's a path and we do go out there, but we probably only go out there once a week rather than, over to the chickens or over to the rabbits or over to the garden, which is a couple times a day. And so anyway, you divide all these up into zones, and in this book, Gaia's Garden, Toby writes down what the function is, what structures should go in this area, what crops you should grow in whatever zone, what garden techniques, water sources, and animals for each one of those zones. I mean, really good way to look at it and just break it down. He has lots of graphs, lots of charts, and I really work on those. Those work well for me. He also has, because he's lived in Portland, he has a lot of the same issues that we have here with deer and things like that, and the same kind of plants will grow here as grow there. And so he talks about in bringing the soil to life, he talks about how the breakdown of plants goes from the plant matter itself into the microorganisms eating the plant matter, to the bigger organisms like the worms and snails and slugs and beetles and flies and stuff eating the microorganisms, and then the bigger bugs breaking down, and then eventually like a chicken or something would eat the bigger bugs, and then when they die, the microorganisms start all over. The circle of life. In that way, I've kind of learned a little bit more and decided that we don't need to till very often, because we don't want to destroy the different layers of the soil, because we don't want to kill all the microorganisms in one shot, which of course will increase the fertility for a very short amount of time. So anyway, this book is it's one of the books that I've actually read. Like I read books. I mean, I'm not illiterate, but I don't usually read books like this, guides or manuals. But he really puts it into a kind of a storybook sort of, with situations and problems, and it's interesting. It's not as boring as some of the other books that I've used, and I usually only use them for a reference. But this I've read it and used it as a reference. Let's see. Talks about using some water. Of course, he goes through, putting water in the landscape and how to do that and how to keep it sealed or moving. He has lots of lists of plants and what they're useful for. So one of the things that I've just used in the design I'm working on right now is guilds. His plant family, his fruit tree guilds, and I just used that in designing some of these fruit tree guilds in this area that my client is having me design, and it has been really interesting, and I've learned some things. We're going to change a few things. I'm going to plant some more plants in my food forest area to try to make more use of the different layers of sunlight. And I mean, I've known some of these things before, but I didn't have. You have to read things over and over a few times before they really get solidified in your memory. At least that's the way it works with me. So as I've read about some of these things, now I know, well, around the bottom of my trees, I'm going to put in some rhubarb for the green mulch. And also you can make bug spray out of the leaves. I'm going to put in some comfrey around there, some borage around my fruit trees. Daffodils help to inhibit grass growth. So you can put a ring of daffodils around your fruit trees, and then the grass won't grow up near the trunk. What else? Anyway, there was a list of things that I was reading and thinking, oh, that is a really good idea. You can put out your fava beans. You can plant them in the late fall, and then they'll overwinter and grow in the spring, and then you can harvest off the pods, and you could probably get a couple crops of fava beans. I mean, I was just like, that is really dang cool. And plus, then as their roots die off, then they leave nitrogen in the soil. And I learned all this stuff from this book, Gaia's Garden. He has a whole section on growing a food forest with an idea, just little drawings of ideas on how to establish something like that. With really nice pictures and things. Anyway, plant lists, there's just so much good stuff to this book. If you're interested in designing your property for maximum yield and maximum food grown on your property, as we all should be, because after all, we're looking to live a more sustainable life, then I would suggest this book called Gaia's Garden. And let's see, the list on the back of here says $29.95, but you might be able to get it, for less than you probably can on Amazon. But it is just, I don't know. I love this book. So there you have it. I love it. And on the more sustainable lives, I was thinking about this earlier. And I say more sustainable lives, and I've listened to a podcast, and the guy was talking about, sustainable just means that you're staying the same. What we should be searching for is regenerative. Well, I agree. I totally agree that we should be working on regenerative, which means to make it better and better so that it keeps getting better and better. But right now, I feel that society is in such a downward spiral in their consuming and taking and not giving back that if we can get more people to the sustainable level, then they're on the right track to the regenerative level. And so right now we are learning and growing together, which was by design that I picked the tagline to be the learn and grow together, because this is really a growing opportunity for me too. I've learned a lot in researching things for the podcast and trying to, make sure that you guys had a meaningful episode every time. So this has been the Haven Homestead podcast, where we learn and grow together on our way to living more sustainable lives. Thanks for listening.